two. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
I was just wondering if that's a federal court or a
No, it's
prosecutor or a state.
I believe it's a state court, which makes it even more unusual. Unsealed federal court. You're right, Tom. It's a federal court. So never mind Virginia. The US has a complex system. We have the Supreme Court, and then we have federal jurisdictions. I don't understand it, but okay, so a federal court in Virginia is conducting a war crimes trial against 4 Russians. Just a couple more items. We were all disappointed yesterday to see the funding bill for Ukraine not be passed. We don't know if that's the end of the question. I really, really hope that if the US system ever settles down, that's a big if. I hope that this can become a reality. One irony, Ruslan Stefanchuk, the chair of the Verkhovna Rada, is here in the US, and as just before the vote took place, he was in the Capitol lobbying for funds for Ukraine. He later gave a conference at the Atlantic Council. I was able to listen in on that. The English interpretation was not working, so I understood about a third of it in Ukrainian. He was here lobbying for that bill, unsuccessfully as of yesterday, but I hope there could be a long-term benefit. Let's see, survey, I see. And then a last general comment to people on the call. I have really, really appreciated your final papers. They've been coming in. I don't have them for everybody, but the ones that I've received are really outstanding. Some of them had to do with Russian disinformation and Russian disinformation in Africa. We have, I would say, the world expert on this topic, Tom Kent, with us, and we'll hear his point of view about that. Let me say that maybe a dozen of you chose to do ICS's country strategies with using the format that we use in the United States. These were breathtaking. These were fantastic. And I think some of you know that we're gathering some of your papers, and I hope that FPRI has suggested publishing in some form, either electronically or maybe in a brochure format, some of the incredible papers you've written. My reaction to your ICS is, first of all, I'm in total admiration of every single one of them. And here's an observation, which, and I told you some of you in my responses, isn't it curious that an integrated country strategy, we're using the American format, all of them should come to life, that you should all be ambassadors. You chose Brazil and UK and Israel and I think Germany, and Poland. How interesting. Almost all of them, your priorities included things that we would not include in an American system because they were multilateral. And this made me think, I never thought for a minute, they don't understand the assignment. On the contrary, you brought to me a new perspective on what an integrated country strategy can be. Why multilateral? Because the struggle that Ukraine is now involved in is universal. We've heard it from many of our speakers. We're so sorry that Ukraine is the site of so much conflict, but we know that, and we've heard this expression many times, you are doing this for us because we know that your success will inhibit Russian expansion. And so in your ICSs, this is a general comment, I saw this 5 or 6 or 7 times. Among your country objectives were things like help us fight Russian disinformation in your country. Help us have more support in the United Nations. This is fascinating. this is not something that we would put in an American ICS, but in fact, you've added a new dimension. And for reasons I understand, because your struggle is universal and it is, it's more than bilateral. With this said, let me not forget to show you my Bible. This is my Bible. This is Tom Kent's incredible book. It's the best source by far that I've seen on the topic of Russian disinformation. He wrote it 3 years before the invasion of Ukraine. So Tom, you are a prophet. You are able to predict, maybe you're sort of a Cassandra, I don't know. You're able to predict challenging things even 3 years before they happen. So
Well, I wish it hadn't happened.
yeah, I know. So Tom Kent, over to you. We're not going to determine the topics, but we know that you can talk about the history of RFE/RL, and you can talk about disinformation, and you can talk about journalistic standards. Thank you for being with us, Tom. Over to
Thanks.
you.
Thanks. Well, I'll talk about a number of topics fairly briefly, and then we can zero in on the things that interest you the most. So first, let me introduce myself. Is everybody here Ukrainian?
No, we have a mixture of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Kenya, and others, a few others. So
Okay.
yeah.
All right, fine. Who are all online now? Okay, fine.
We're all on, yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. All right, so I'll talk about a number of topics, and then we'll pick the ones you want to talk about in more depth. So my background is sort of a mixed background of journalism and Russian affairs. At university, I was a Russian studies, Russian and East European studies was my major. But I spent most of my free time working for our university's newspaper. So I was in Russia and journalism at the same time, even then. And then I joined the Associated Press. There I was based in a number of countries, Brussels, Tehran, Australia, and Moscow. So I was doing journalism and Russia stuff. I was the bureau chief, I corresponded and bureau chief in Moscow long ago. This was under Brezhnev's time, but practically every year after that, I went back to Moscow again and sort of became the Russia specialist of the Associated Press. And then eventually at the AP, I became ethics editor, standards editor, we called it. So I was responsible for the quality and the veracity of AP's news coverage worldwide, and for the professional ethical conduct of our correspondents. So after that, in 2016, I left AP and became president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, based in Prague. Just 2 words about RFE/RL. RFE/RL is an international broadcaster, but broadcast these days, we don't mean just radio, we mean television, we mean social networks, we mean websites, everything. And it's subsidized by the US government, pretty much 100% by the US government. And its target areas are the former Soviet Union, East Europe, Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And although it is, so it's operating in 25 languages, and the fact that it's paid for by the US government does not mean that the government controls what it broadcasts. The reason they chose me to head it was that I was a specialist in journalism and journalistic ethics, and they thought that I would carry out my duties, which are mandated in law, to run a professional news organization, not be a mouthpiece for the US government. So the whole time that I was president of RFE/RL, no one in the US government had the right to tell me what RFE/RL should say or not say. It was an independent organization. Now, of course, people gave me a lot of opinions about what we should say, ambassadors in various countries and State Department people. I mean, any journalist listens to opinions, but I was always very comfortable that nobody could give me any orders. And so that was why I agreed to be president of RFE/RL. Now, of course, from the Russian standpoint, RFE/RL is a total propaganda operation. I mean, they cannot imagine that you can have an organization that's paid for by the government but not controlled by the government. It's a parallel universe. I mean, I don't think they can just imagine that such a thing could exist, but it does. Of course, much of the news that we covered was things that were unpleasant for the Russian authorities. We focus on human rights issues, we focus on democracy, we focus on anti-corruption. So obviously these were unpleasant subjects, but this was not, U.S. government ideological sabotage. This was our understanding as journalists of what would be interesting stories for people in our target area. So I was at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Then I came back to New York. I teach now, or actually resume teaching, because I taught there before some too, at Columbia University. I teach about the World Information War and the operational aspects of that, and the Russian aspects of that, and the ethical aspects of that. And there's lots of ethics in this, in terms of, do you want to use the same tactics that your adversaries do or not? And I consult for NGOs and governments and so forth on disinformation, Russia kind of issues. And I also consult for news organizations on ethics. A lot of them are writing or revising ethics codes. And so I do consulting on that. And I write books. Dan kindly showed my book, Striking Back. I just published another one called How Russia Loses, which is basically about failings and weak points in Russian foreign policy and Russian influence operations. Let's talk a little bit to start with about everyone's favorite topic, which is disinformation. Everyone uses that term. It's not my favorite. The reason is that disinformation implies lies, but information operations are not just made of lies. They are often just an artful arrangement of true information. If you looked at the content of Sputnik News or RT or something like that over time, you would find that many statements there are true. It's just how it's organized and what's left out. So I prefer generally the term information operation, which covers true information arranged in some artful way to make a political point, and also just flat out lying. We talk often about giving the people the truth, but the truth can be a moving target as well. A lot of people, to begin with, don't want the truth. The truth is unpleasant. It doesn't solve their problems. It requires that they do things and make efforts. I mean, if the true way to improve your society it requires actually making some effort, then they don't want to make the effort. That truth is not one they want. The truth they want is that there's a simple way out for all their problems, a unified theory that explains everything. One villain or a very small group of villains, one interpretation of history, one set of grievances that explain everything going on in the world. And when people look for that, this unified theory, this is all because of whom, then they become prey for hostile information operations and conspiracy theorists who will tell them that the root problem of everything is George Soros, or all Jews, or colonialism, or the ethnic minority in your country, or the United States, or whatever. That it's never you. It's never your lack of agency. It's never your lack of concern about your own country. It's never your own lack of empathy toward people. It's always some conspiracy that's been organized against you. You are always the victim. And if we can just get rid of, George Soros, the legacy of colonialism or whatever, all will be well. So now people, may suspect that things are not this simple, but information operations are often sort of a willing collaboration between the people who launch them and the people who they target. People recognize they're not getting the whole truth, but the grievance narrative is just so attractive that and so easy that they easily adopt it. So we have this collision between the truth, at least our truth, a truth of political liberty, respect for human dignity, free markets, and very attractive hostile narratives that sound good, but in fact offer very little in terms of how to make societies more prosperous. What they offer is just a sort of a narrative of revenge. If only we can get power, we'll get rid of all these bad people. And then they don't really explain how that's going to improve anything. How will it make societies more prosperous? It's a kind of magical thinking like communism, that if we can just put all the means of production in the hands of the people, then somehow magically, we'll all become rich. Now, some of these authoritarian narratives do offer ways to make societies safer, and I got to say honestly that in a lot of parts, of the global South, so to speak, what people are most concerned about is crime, violence, guerrilla groups that are attacking their villages and so forth. And authoritarian narratives do actually have something to offer sometimes in terms of establishing just plain security. It is helpful if you're fighting some guerrilla group, out in the countryside. It's helpful to be able to go out, maybe with Russian mercenaries, and just go out and murder them all, and not worry about civil rights or trials or justice or anything, but just go out and murder them. And if you murder the wrong people, well, that's collateral damage that happens. But maybe that will make things safer. So yeah, if you want to look at your future simply as, can we reduce crime? Maybe, there are some things to be said for authoritarian narratives, but that's where they end. And of course, once authoritarians have wiped out the guerrillas in the countryside, they inevitably move to wipe out their political opponents at home. I mean, once you start being violent and acting without principle against people who you consider bad guys, you will expand that obviously to everybody, and then problems ensue. None of these narratives really have anything to do with becoming a more just, a more equal, a more prosperous society. China, of course, has a lot of money, and they do propose to countries that if they do what China says, they can all be rich like China. But in a lot of countries, they have concluded that the Chinese model is great for China, but they would have trouble applying it in their circumstances. So, but all of this is extremely attractive. The idea that we can give you security, that we can make you rich somehow in some way that's not described, that none of your problems are your fault. This is all the acts of colonialists, and so this creates, as you know, a very effective package for some people, and it clearly has some success. I mean, I don't think it will long term. The world lives in cycles. You know, if you look at human history, it's a constant cycle between oppression and people throwing off oppression. So this will go, you know, through cycles for probably the rest of human existence. But at the moment, people do feel that we're in one of those cycles where sometimes, you know, oppressive narratives are, you know, on the upswing and meeting some success in some places. So we become properly concerned. And we ask then, what are the best options here? What counter disinformation or counter information operation strategies are the best? I think the first tendency of everybody, at least in most countries, is to think that this is the government's problem. Government needs to deal with all this. A lot of people think that in the United States. A lot of people think that in other countries. Government has money. The government is supposedly, you know, organized. It should see the dangers. It should do something about it. But and governments do many great things. I don't mean to dismiss any of the good things they do. But on the whole, I don't think governments are particularly effective in the Western governments are particularly effective in the information environment. The variety of reasons for this. One of them is that in most democratic countries, governments are worried, don't like the idea of propaganda. They don't like doing propaganda. It feels immoral to them. It feels like copying bad actors. They don't want to do it. They're often just not very creative or clever, so they come up with these campaigns that are pretty lame and don't accomplish what they want. And then there's the question of, do you really want governments administering the information environment? If the government is really wonderful, you know, for a certain amount of time, it's probably okay. But generally speaking, you know, I don't think that limiting or controlling speech is the kind of things that governments want to specialize in. They should be advocating for freedom of speech rather than limiting it. In a number of countries, governments have blocked various disinformation outlets, you know, RT, Sputnik, etc. My heart agrees with this. My head has a problem because it seems to me that blocking out information that you don't like just makes it more attractive to people. You know, it's a forbidden fruit. If the government is keeping you from seeing it, then it must be something attractive, and it will attract even more attention by the government trying to ban it. This was what we experienced with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. That when over many decades, that when the more that repressive governments tried to jam our radio broadcasts or block us on the web or whatever, the more people became curious and made an effort to reach our content, and they still do at great risk. And one of the reasons is because it is forbidden. They figure it must be really hot if it's forbidden. So and so the same thing works in the other direction. If we have a democratic country that's blocking RT, you know, people will find, you know, some way to get it, you know, on the web or, you know, VPNs or whatever. But at the same time, you have to do something if you're gonna allow these kinds of broadcasts or web services to come in, and even if you try to block them and don't do it very efficiently, you have to have something to put up against them. I respect the fact that a lot of this content is extremely dangerous, and you can't just leave it without response. But, you know, so what are the responses going to be? I talked before about, you know, governments sort of doing counter disinformation campaigns and all the problems that involves when the government is administering the information space. People commonly talk about media literacy. I think some of you have written about that in your papers. Great. It has some downsides. One of them is that it's sort of a long-term strategy. And then you just hope that the media literacy is going to drive people to the news media that you want them to read. But even, sort of respectable, reliable, pro-democracy news media make mistakes. And we've had plenty of criticism recently in the United States of American news coverage, for example, of the Gaza war. And U.S. publications, prestigious, Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera, have gotten things wrong. So there's always a danger that this fresh new graduate from media literacy is going to say, okay, let me use my media literacy tools on the New York Times and decide that it's not that reliable. I think on the whole, the New York Times is a lot better than most publications out there, including ones run by authoritarian states. But there is always that question with media literacy, in addition to it being a very long-term strategy. Then you have fact checking. Anybody know who actually subsidizes most of the world's fact checking organizations? No,
Wow.
Dan?
I have no idea. The Washington Post, I don't know.
No, they don't have any money. They need it for
I
themselves.
know they're in a deficit. Yeah.
Right. No, the main supporter of fact checking organizations is Facebook. Now, whether that's out of the goodness of their heart that they spend millions on this, subsidizing fact checking organizations around the world, or whether it's blood money because they realize how much damage Facebook has done to the world information environment, I couldn't tell you. But that's where much of the money comes from. The International Fact Checking Network and all its affiliates gets a huge amount of money from Facebook. Not huge enough, but huge. So fact checking, God bless, it can be very effective, but often the fact checks only get to people who care about the facts. Facebook and some other social networks try to sometimes attach fact check results to various fake narratives, but that's sort of a hit and miss thing. And of course, it all depends on what you think of the fact checker. In a lot of countries, hostile actors have smeared the fact checkers. So people don't have a lot of confidence in them. I think that of all the different kinds of strategies that are most effective or likely to be most effective against hostile IOs, information operations, is probably organic non-government groups in individual countries. I think they can be very effective. They're authentic. They can be creative. They for years have been the major engine in Ukraine fighting Russian disinformation. I mean, you can argue about individual organizations, and some people, like one Ukrainian organization or another. But on the whole, the civil society kind of NGOs have been extremely effective in the Ukrainian information environment. And these groups can be additionally powerful if they link up with other groups, women's rights groups, for example, environmental groups, and so forth. But they do suffer from limitations. Certainly one of them is scale, their size. A lot of them are quite small and can't do the research and planning and campaigning that they would like to. Some of them don't really have the skills to make, quick little videos and so forth, although with AI, it's getting easier to do this kind of stuff. Some of these groups from country to country tend to be fairly close to cafe society, which is to say their members and their orientation is sort of toward the more educated classes in these countries. And then as a result, they don't really speak to the people out in the countryside who vote and who are very important. They don't speak in their language, in their way of speaking, the kind of cultural or religious or references that are part of their lives. They're mainly urban, very Western oriented. You know, whenever I meet with these pro-democracy groups in every country, and everyone I meet with speaks English, then I really worry because we're dealing obviously with a certain level of society that is not necessarily organic to other levels of society. I see some of these groups shying away from certain things certain areas where they might be more effective. One of them is religion. Religion is very important to a lot of people in a lot of these countries, but I see sort of pro-democracy groups not wanting to use religious imagery or religious arguments for reasons that we can discuss. I see them being reluctant to use patriotic, nationalist imagery. Often they reason, and not without basis, that, you know, too much patriotism or too much nationalism can lead to all sorts of bad, you know, fascist, anti-immigrant kind of feelings, and you don't want to mess too much with patriotism. But still, you know, we know that people are motivated by religion, people are motivated by patriotism. Do we want to put those areas completely off limits to ourselves? And so, you know, this is the kind of thing we run into. There's also, with regard to journalism, there's a lot of, you know, independent, high quality journalism being conducted in these countries. By these countries, what I mean basically is any country that's at risk for hostile disinformation operations, which is essentially all countries. So we see this high quality journalism not reaching much of an audience. And I will say to journalists at these high quality organizations who, you know, they have a website and, you know, some following, but not very many. I say, well, what's the problem? And they say, well, the problem is that the bad guys, you know, the conspiracy theorists and the authoritarians and the oligarchs and everything, they run these cheap tabloids that they get huge followings, and everybody reads them, and they have UFOs, and they have, you know, movie stars, and they have sports, and in there they stick a little of their disinformation. And so I say, well, you know, have you ever thought of setting up your own tabloid with a lot of UFOs and movie stars and sports? I mean, true stories. I mean, it is true that governments are investigating UFOs. It is true that Taylor Swift is very famous. You know, there's a lot of true things you can write about subjects that people want to read about. And then you slip in there a little bit of your pro-democracy content. And when I say that, I almost always get the same reaction, which is a lecture about yellow journalism. And all these people have, you know, taught it, you know, gone to classes or done online courses from Poynter or Columbia Journalism School or something, and are all prepared to lecture me on the evils of sensationalism. And my feeling is, well, you know, okay, fine. Now you're confining yourself to your small audience. I mean, there's always a hope that, you know, civil society groups can take an expose that appears in some small, high quality website and spread it around the country. But, you know, that's a second degree of difficulty. It's another link in the chain. You know, maybe there should be something that is more immediately attractive to large numbers of people. So that's me. That's me and some of the things that I think. And I'm going to pause here because I think I've bent your ear long enough, and I'd much rather talk about things that specifically are of interest to you.
Tom, thank you so much. And I want everybody, for context, he modestly describes the Columbia Journalism School as a in fact, it is the premier journalism school in the United States. We call it the J School in the craft because it's the Vatican. I say that ironically, but it's
very ironic.
Yeah. Anyway, bad analogy, but this is the most respected journalism school in the United States. Everybody should understand that. So much wealth in what you've just given us. I just want to refer to, I want to contextualize, I hate that word, some of what Tom has said in terms of what we've been talking about this semester. He said early in his talk that it's very easy to give people a sense that it's not your fault. There's something bad happening and it's not your fault. The first couple of weeks in this course, we talked about perceived injustice as one of the causes of conflict. And I think there you have a perfect example. Tom, I have an unscientific formula: perceived injustice, resource scarcity, misunderstanding, and there's another one, which I think can explain most of the conflict we have. Let me also mention a little bit out of context. This morning, the Central Asia program of the Institute for European, Russian, and the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Affairs, IRIS at George Washington, ran a seminar. I was not aware of this. In January of 2022, there was a lot of violence in the streets in Kazakhstan. Many of you on this call are from Kazakhstan, and the discussion was very fascinating. These were sociologists. I don't quite understand what happened, but one of the hypotheses is that it could have been provoked by a repressive government as a kind of agent provocateur action in order to get a react. This is so, I will never understand what happened in Almaty in January of 2022. Maybe Tom knows, but this was a fascinating discussion. It's probably been recorded, and if I can find the recording, I'll send it around. But this was a mysterious gathering of people that turned violent. We don't know how much of it might have been actually intentional on the part of who? The government, the opposition to the government. Sometimes when these things happen, if the bad people who arrange them are very skillful, they can leave all sorts of doubts. They can lead people to believe anything really about these were opposition leaders. This was the government. This was perhaps people brought in from the outside and such. Much of what Tom describes in terms of the willingness to believe crazy things, any American will listen to this with a sense of great pain, because we know that this is happening in the United States also. And this certainly is a domestic issue. I have a number of comments and additions, but I'd like to encourage everybody on the call to come in with your own thoughts on this. Tom and I have talked about Debunk EU, and I know some of you have been in contact with them. They would be an example. I don't know how many examples there might be. Very few, I think, of the type of non-governmental entities that Tom tells us may be the best positioned in order to combat disinformation. Governments in democratic countries are very reluctant to get involved in this this cruel battle between truth and untruth. As he says, people quickly come to distrust the veracity of a government that would even be involved in such a thing. So I have other things in mind, but let's turn to Maria Znamenok, and then after that to Dima Arlovsky. Maria, what's on your mind?
First of all, thank you very much. I have two questions. My first question would be focused on, I'm trying to understand, and I haven't yet formed an opinion of my own on this topic. but I would like to hear, what do you think is the true reason, or maybe the proportion of reasoning behind Russian informational campaigns? Is it truly the difference in worldview with the West, and are they genuine in the campaigns that they're trying to promote? Or is it just a cover-up of the authoritarian government that is trying to distract the population from looking inwards? And my second question, if you don't mind, I will try to be quick, is maybe not even a question, but an idea that I had when you talked about the rejection of sensationalism. Maybe instead of using the social sensationalism, like the celebrities and so on, focus on the political sensationalism. I will try to explain what I mean by that. Using the popular formats that are more emerging in the younger generations, so debates. People often even self-organize some debates where they invite specialists in the field or people who have some sort of expertise, and they engage in a debate on the questions that are often interesting for the general population, but aren't as covered in the media. So maybe this approach of using the expertise, but using the popular formats that are already easy to digest for the majority of people is maybe some sort of way for that.
Sounds brilliant to me. Absolutely brilliant to use a format that is more familiar to younger people in order to talk about true things rather than disinformation. Tom, what's your reaction to that?
I like it. It depends obviously on the country and who you can catch with that format. If you can make politics interesting enough that people will follow it. I mean, in some countries, people are just totally cynical about politics, and anything that's political, they just, they see the face of a politician and they just lose interest immediately and go back to TikTok. So, but if it works, that's fine. I'm not saying we necessarily have to have UFOs. If we can make politics interesting in some way, that would be great. As for Russia's goal, whether they really have this, whether we have a difference of opinion about the future of the world, a difference of opinion on political philosophy, or whether this is just all a trick to cover up an evil regime, it's very hard to tell. I suppose it doesn't really affect how we should respond, because the narrative is what the narrative is, and whatever their motivation, it's different. I mean, it's the same. We need to respond probably in the same way within our own countries. My guess would be that what you're seeing is a combination of certain attitudes, Russian grievance, and distress over the end of the Soviet Union and all that kind of thing. The perception that the West is so powerful and that they're at a disadvantage. A combination of that and just realpolitik, absolute trickiness in the information environment, which they do quite open-mindedly I mean quite overtly, to be tricky. I mean, I think they have a wonderful time at RT and all these other places. I think it's a lot of fun for them to see what they can make up and what they can make people believe. So it's probably a combination.
I should warn everybody that the value of Tom's book is that every wonderful idea presented in this book, he will tell you immediately the drawback, the advantage and the drawback of every idea. This does not make us comfortable, but it does make us smart. To be able to understand a strategy. This course is partly about strategy. To understand the various hypotheses that are out there, and to find the drawback and defect in each one of them. That way, when we actually implement something, we'll do it with much greater understanding. I'm shocked that Tom does not understand that UFOs do exist and that they're populated by pedophiles. I'm shocked that you would question such a thing. Tom used this word truthiness, which Americans are familiar with. Maybe you could remind our listeners where this came about 10 years ago. There was an author who created this word truthiness, and we take it for granted, but maybe we should explain this for audiences in other continents.
Actually, I didn't say truthiness.
I thought you did. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. So can we now talk about that word?
You talk about the word. I'm not sure.
I imagined it.
I thought it was something that George Bush said or something, but I don't know. You must have more depth.
No, there was, never mind. There was a communications author, forget his name, who created this notion. It implied a truth which is trivial, a truth which doesn't really matter, and the appearance also. It has to do with the appearance of telling the truth, and the ease with which propagandists can deceive people. I'm not an expert on this. Let's go to Dmytro Olovsky.
Thanks for the lecture and for giving me a word. Can you give some examples of how to reduce the impact of misinformation on people?
I'm sorry, say some examples of what?
To reduce the impact of misinformation on people.
Yeah, how does misinformation work? How does it achieve success? How does it manage to deceive people? Is that it?
And reduce this impact of ours.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it is that it's very skillfully constructed. That if you look at, at the most dangerous kinds of propaganda, they are presented very effectively. Very short, simple arguments. They are the same arguments are repeated again and again. The context changes, but the same arguments. I mean, for example, secret American laboratories. This was used by the Soviet Union long ago to claim that the United States invented AIDS. It was used in the Ukraine war to accuse the U.S. of making all these biological agents in Ukraine and creating agents that would turn Ukrainian soldiers into murderous zombies. It was used during during COVID that the American pharmaceutical companies were evilly inserting mind control stuff into vaccines. So this, like, one theme of secret U.S. laboratories has existed for decades and is just adapted to whatever current circumstances exist. There are probably only 10 or 20 themes like that. So it's very simple, and it's very effective because people have to learn only 10 or 20 concepts, and then everything that happens in the world can be fit into those concepts. So it's an intellectual, if I can use the expression, the intellectual structure that's very simple, very organized, very limited. You don't have to be very smart to learn it all, and then everything can be ground through it. Disinformation also uses all the emotional triggers that I talked about. Patriotism and religion and children, and except when they're kidnapping them, but children in general, fear of foreigners, xenophobia, fear of any kind of minority, sexual minority, ethnic minority. Again, I've listed half of them already, and there's only about 10 more. And so it's easy. I mean, everything that they have to say could be fit on a bumper sticker on a car. You could reduce every one of these things to, 5 or 10 words, which is easy for people to understand. Democracy? Oh my God, you can't fit that on a bumper sticker. It's so complicated and so involved. And how a bill becomes a law, and how parliaments work and everything. I mean, this is just too hard for an awful lot of people. And now, of course, you can reduce democracy and human rights to bumper sticker slogans if you want. I want to be able to give my opinion without being arrested. I want to feel that the judge is not, in the pocket of the politician. I mean, you could do that. But the democracy community tends not to. It tends to use a lot of nuance and not want to say things that are oversimplified, and take everything into account and have online debates instead of just sort of cutting with really aggressive comments.
І ти вирішила, що я не дзвоню, правильно?
Dima, could you mute, please? Thank you. No, it's
Yeah,
okay.
sorry,
It's okay.
sorry.
You're always forgiven. And it implied in Tom's response is the question. He says short and simple seems to work. Why cannot the truth be using that same structure? And I'm not trying to sound erudite here, but Aristotle, ethos, logos, pathos. Ethos, establish to the audience who you are, whether that's a true identity or a false identity in the case of RT and such. But we know that I don't think we have come up with better formulas for rhetoric than Aristotle did. Ethos, establish your own veracity somehow by understanding the audience, by demonstrating. Logos, use words and proofs and logic to make your point. And pathos, the use of emotion. Now we know that the success of propaganda is mainly due to that third element, pathos. And sometimes we have like a dialogue of the deaf because the disinformation sources are very strong in using pathos, and sometimes the government response will be logos. And so you don't really have a dialogue here. You have two different rhetorical planes, and that this may be one reason why government responses fall flat. I think there's much wisdom in what Tom has just told us. If disinformation is successful with short and simple messages, why cannot true information take that same format? We go now to Veronika Szeptachowska.
Hello. First of all, thank you for the lecture. And I have a question. To what extent do you think freedom of speech and free journalism can be restricted in wartime? Because on the one hand, people need to be provided with truthful and comprehensive information about what is going on. But on the other hand, sometimes it is necessary to conceal some facts for the sake of military operations and their success, or to prevent the society from being depressed with the war not going on so well, and for example, Ukrainian counter-offensive not going on so well. But at the same time, some politicians may use the wartime as an excuse for to hide the truth. So what do you think are the limits of those things in the wartime in the country that is being in the state of war?
Thanks, Veronika. That's a brilliant question. And we have the ethicist. We have the perfect person to reflect. There's no perfect answer, right, Tom?
No, I mean, obviously the government has to keep its military secrets. I think everybody would agree with that. But they do have to be honest about, in general, I think they should be honest about what's going on. There are, it is possible to say that our cause is just, and justice will triumph, but it's not going very well right now. And if the government wants to have any credibility in the future, it has to be honest about that. And I think the media probably does too. I mean, obviously, different media organizations have their own emphases that they in terms of how they want to, what they're trying to accomplish with their journalism. I mean, are they really just a fact organization, or are they is part of their goal to inspire people? I mean, your news coverage can be a little different depending on that. But generally speaking, making up an entire fake narrative about victory when victory is not happening won't work, because the media environment is just too porous. The truth will always come in from somewhere. So one has to be honest, I think, about it. I mean, all sorts of bad actors, all sorts of authoritarian countries have made grievance, historical grievance and so forth, part of their information strength, which is to say that, because we lost at the Battle of Kosovo-Polja in 1342, we have to, reclaim our glory and punch back at our enemies. So there's no reason why even unhappy military news can't inspire people to more efforts. But trying to hide bad news that everyone's going to find out about anyhow is really unlikely to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Anecdotally, I was listening to an old video the other day with David Brooks, who mentioned that as a foreign correspondent in his previous career, he interviewed some really bad people, including Slobodan Milosevic and all that. And David Brooks has become somewhat of a moralist, among other things. And he said in this talk that every cruel, murderous person he's ever interviewed believed in the justice of what they themselves were doing. They had persuaded themselves that their cause was just. I think Tom's example of the Battle of Kosovo in the 14th century becomes a grievance. Examples of a fake narrative that we know quite well from the 20th century. Remember the stab in the back. The German military in World War I was sending fake news to the German people saying, we're winning the war, we're winning the war. And when Germany surrendered, Germans who had been consuming this propaganda were stunned, including Hitler, and believed that their own military had betrayed them. And this was called the stab in the back, which became the grievance that was part of what led to World War II. There's also a good, funny story about a woman in a prisoner of war camp in Germany during World War II, listening to Nazi propaganda on the radio, announcing, after the invasion of Russia, announcing the various victories, the German victories in Russia. And she knew the geography of Russia, and she realized that these so-called victories, instead of going west to east, they were going east to west. So she realized that this was propaganda. It didn't help world history, but it was a funny anecdote in the ability of one person to quickly identify lies for what they are. I see Maria has another comment. You're very welcome, Maria.
I have a comment on the appeal of democracy and how maybe what could be the potential solution to finding that simple truth that could be maybe potentially even end up on the bumper stickers. Because being the part of the general population, I would say not that like separated from the general classes and so on, but still experiencing the revolution of dignity in Ukraine and seeing the appeal of the European Union inside Ukraine and the ideals of democracy and so on. I got acquainted, I would say, with the people who found that appeal of democracy within themselves and found that will to study how the government works, how to keep the government accountable, how to participate in elections in the fair way, and so on. So my idea would be maybe use people like that who've already found that ideal for themselves and try to understand what made them follow this idea of appealing democracy and maybe distill that idea. And I have a question regarding the Facebook, because you mentioned that they are the biggest contributor to fact-checking organizations. But at the same time, we know that Facebook has been criticized for not being able to fact-check their own platforms. So why would you say they're not using those resources that they are contributing to outside organizations to instead mitigate the situation within their own platforms?
Well, of
Thank
course, they've got enough resources. They could do both if they wanted to. But I think that a part of the idea, I think, is that the fact-checking organizations generate a lot of material which Facebook can then use to attach to false material. So it's sort of a cycle. In a way, they're sort of outsourcing fact-checking to these different organizations, and then they take that product and put it back on their platform. But the problem is volume, that there's such an enormous volume of dangerous and fake material on Facebook that even with tens of thousands of monitors, which they have, they can't really get on top of it. I mean, even if they wanted to. I suppose there's always a question of trying to look into their minds and thinking, do they really want to? I mean, if Facebook makes money because people stay on the platform and people are endlessly fascinated and keep finding one interesting thing after another, and it can corral people into groups who are interested in particular things and sell them advertising. So there has to be a constant. They have to endlessly fascinate people, and unfortunately, an awful lot of the fascinating content on Facebook is very negative content, because disinformation operators have learned how to manufacture that content at a high rate. So if one could, the biggest way to help Facebook probably would be to generate a huge, powerful stream of reasonable, accurate, pro-democracy content that would win people in itself. Just trying to, the strategy of just trying to get rid of bad content or attach warnings to it. It's all a negative strategy. It's not a positive strategy. What you need is positive messaging.
We have somebody in Nairobi. Can you, again, Ellie, my software is not working. Can you unmute the person in? Here we go. Yes, you're on. Yes. Who are we speaking with? Good to have you. Is this Peter by any chance?
This is Peter Mbuva and
Peter
Dan
Mbuva.
Whitman.
Thank you,
Peter.
Peter.
Good evening.
Hi.
Yes.
Peter, go ahead.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I just wanted to make a comment. He has really dwelt on the idea of disinformation. Then I have also benefited coming from marketing profession, a career that I've done for like 15 to 20 years. And marketers will tell you that advertising is an unpersonal form of presentation that is paid for by an identified sponsor. But look at what is currently happening. You will wake up to news in the newspaper that a certain agency has released results that it is in terms of perception on how it is relating with other countries. And then you ask yourself, who has paid them to write? And this brings me to looking at disinformation through the prism of maybe statecraft and national interests. And that is why countries are being engaged in this disinformation to pursue certain interests that are of benefit to them and to the disadvantage of the others. And therefore, some of these, when I was looking at a study on external interventions, there are hidden countries that are using that one as a tool. How are we likely to overcome this in the era of digital diplomacy? I think that brings to our conversation the realization that internet is really an accelerator. However, in the African countries, in my own feeling, governments are taking a lot of control on it. And mostly those who want to continue certain leadership will use the developed world to interfere even with the internet to change people's perception and also influence outcome in terms of elections. And that's why we have problems of governance. Thank you so much.
Peter, we thank you coming from your vast experience as a marketing professional. We did not know this about you. You bring up the question of what we sometimes call mimesis, you know, the viceroy and the monarch butterfly. One of them is poisonous, the other one is not. And so the one which is not poisonous, nature uses mimesis for the protection of a species. Whichever of these two butterflies is harmless pretends to be the poisonous one in order to survive. Now, we know that Russian troll farms often project themselves as something other than what they really are. And I think that's the root of Peter's comment, which is a profoundly important topic. I call it mimesis, the ability to project yourself as somebody other than who you really are. Tom, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's forgery. It's counterfeiting operations. I know the Russians have a campaign going now with people like Taylor Swift, supposedly saying that they oppose Ukraine, and they're on the Russian side. Yeah, I mean, it just new forms of lying, and they certainly get traction. But one would hope that Taylor Swift would issue a statement saying this is junk, but to my knowledge she hasn't. But then it's the job of counter marketers, sort of pro-democracy marketers, to get into this and expose it and attack this kind of thing. But if you just let it sit without a response, or you write an article in the Washington Post about how terrible this is, it doesn't affect things on the ground in a given country. We see the use of artificial intelligence, deep fakes. I mean, this is going to be more and more common among bad actors. I don't think that good people should use deep fakes, but they certainly need to be to have very aggressive marketing campaigns to attack and ridicule these deep fakes and demonstrate how fake they are. Maybe with their own examples of Putin saying how much he loves a certain kind of ice cream, just to make the point that anybody can do anything with deep fakes and to undermine their effect. But we tend to just sort of throw up our hands and be scared instead of really going into battle.
Thank you for that. Now, Ilya Lopaichuk, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation about really interesting topic. Really interesting also because it's one of the important part of different war conflict, including Ukraine and Russia military conflict. And in the topic of fake news, propaganda, and as we say in Ukraine and also in Russia, IPSO or informational psychological operations, the question is next. To what extent one or another side can gain an advantage in such informational psychological battle? And what is most important in such a case, the quality of this news, maybe with some new technologies, or, for example, number of sources that uses this information. And also, we can mention some that are many different special military formations in many armies, including U.S. Army, Ukraine Army, Russian Army, that involved in this, and how big is their role on the battle? Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. Tom, did that come through clearly?
I guess the question is, how do you win this battle? Is that?
I think so. And also, should the military ever be out front as a source of information?
Out front in what way?
Well, remember the Pentagon briefings during the Vietnam War with the body counts.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's what Ilya is thinking of, but I think Ilya is suggesting that.
No, there are many in different armies. There are many military formations that involved in making some of this propaganda, fake news, informational psychological operations, and how big their role is on the battlefield of this. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, to your first question, to that question, militaries. It depends on your military doctrine. I mean, in the Russian military doctrine, war is always on, and Russia is always fighting, whether it's kinetic fighting or not. So, of course, Russian military organizations, including their military intelligence, are always active on the information front. We think that some of the interference in the 2016 U.S. elections was, in fact, from the Russian military intelligence, the GRU. By that, the Western governments have been a little more reluctant. They tend to want to use the military in time of war, when there's actually shooting going on. But I think the Russian concept is that you don't have to be shooting to be at war. and their military is at work all the time. I think it's an open question whether the militaries are best set to engage in information operations from the Western side. It all depends who else there is. Militaries have a lot of money, and they have a lot of people and a lot of language skills and so forth. So maybe in some countries, the military should be the sort of leading edge of a counter disinformation operation. But it could also be diplomatic organizations, State Department in the U.S. case, or in the intelligence community, or other people. So it just depends on the country where your expertise lies. But I do think that the information war is on all the time, and that you do want a full government response all the time, using whatever tools are in the hands of different agencies who can use them best. In terms of how you win, I mean, I don't know if you ever win. I think the information war, as Sean McFate has said in one of his books, it's like a business. You have good quarters, you have bad quarters. You don't have a moment where you win it, but you would hope that you would be in it, that you would be competing in this, and not just absorbing blows and trying to make your people resilient, but not reacting in any way.
Amanda Bennett, the current director. Oh, thank you, Ilya. Amanda Bennett is the director of this oversight entity, the US AGM, which oversees Voice of America and all the so-called surrogate broadcasters. She said in a recent speech, she notes the very impressive audience that Voice of America has, and I assume it's the same with RFE/RL. But she was very honest in saying we have a problem with disinformation, and her outcome comment really haunts me. She said, "We have not lost the war yet." It's that word "yet" that really was very dramatic when she made this statement. She's a very good journalist, I think, and she understands that disinformation is making great progress, and that the legitimate sources of information have a great struggle in responding to this. And she was very frank about saying, we're not sure how this is going to come out. So far, we're doing okay, but she did have this caveat. She said, it's possible within 2 or 3 years that there could be a decisive advantage on the side of disinformation. I don't know if Tom would agree with her on that. He's just told us there's no magical moment where you win or lose. That's an important point. Could I turn to you, Tom, for an answer to that, and any other final comment that you would have? I think we're reaching the end of our session.
Right. Well, I would just say that, I mean, who knows, what will happen. The world is full of surprises. But I think the U.S. government is wrong if it thinks it can outsource the whole world information war to U.S. international broadcasting. It's not the responsibility of Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and so forth to solve all information problems all over the world. And as a matter of fact, the law requires that they be professional journalistic organizations. They are not supposed to be propaganda voices, as Amanda has pointed out herself on many occasions. So, if the U.S. is going to, or Western countries are going to, be effective in the information conflict, yes, they should do all this international broadcasting, and but that's not it. That's not all. I mean, you have the whole field of public diplomacy. You have support, importantly, of all of pro-democracy civil society organizations in different countries. You have all these things like media literacy and fact checking and journalism. I mean, all these things have to work together. And so U.S. international broadcasting should not be, in anyone's mind, the vehicle that has to carry all of this.
Powerful message. I don't know, Tom, about your schedule. We have one more question from Nairobi.
Take one more, and then I got to run.
Okay, last question from Julie and Nzigire Biringanine. If Ellie can help me unmute her, for some reason.
Permission to speak.
Julie, we're working here. We want your question. Nothing against Kenya. For some reason, unmuting. Kenya has a little bit
Yes,
of a...
done.
Oh, well, no, we want to hear Julie.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Sorry, Ellie, one more try, and then we'll have to conclude.
I'm asking to unmute.
Yeah, me too, and it's not responding. This is a webinar software issue. We really apologize to those who were not able to unmute you. This is our failing, but it's also a mysterious feature of the webinar software. I think we'll just say to Tom, we're so grateful you would join us today, especially for going over in time. I think that implied in all we've been talking about is that disinformation is very powerful. We can understand it. We can check facts. That does not mean that we're actually making any progress in combating it. And Tom has very, very honestly and candidly reminded us that there's no easy solution to this. There are many smaller solutions, but I would encourage people on this call, if you're as angry about Russian disinformation as I am, consider getting involved. It could be with Debunk EU. We've talked about Debunk EU. There may be local group. I hope that in Africa, which is so vulnerable to Russian disinformation, I hope there are citizens groups. I would love to know more. If anybody can ever tell me who's working on this in Africa, where Russia seems to have free reign. So we'll leave this as a gauntlet. Tom has reminded us of the complexity, the ambiguity of this topic. And I would add to that a challenge. Let's see if somehow, through working through civic groups and NGOs and fact checking, if we can somehow in some way oppose disinformation. It's not easy. So Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
My favorite subject.
Wonderful, wonderful. And everybody read Tom and the upcoming book called, remind me, called
How Russia Loses.
How Russia Loses. I like that topic.
And it's got a good deal of content about the information war. And it's available, from all these booksellers, but it's also available for free if you go to the website of the Jamestown Foundation, which I wrote for. You can go to their site and download a copy of it for free.
Fantastic. I will try to put that in the Google Classroom. That is, the Jamestown Foundation is also the publisher of this book. Let me just remind everybody, last session for the fall, next Monday, I will try to summarize some of the things that we've heard. In advance, I want to thank Anastasia Svistula and Oscar Nkulo because they've done that. They've submitted wonderful papers summarizing some of the things we've heard. Sometimes just repeating this can solidify this in our memories. Thanks everybody for your wonderful papers, your participation, and thank you, Tom Kent.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Okay.